Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast.
Pack your suntan lotion as Donna continues her reading of Chapter 6, Bustle, of her autobiography, Love's a Secret Weapon. Donna's the girl in the bikini, one piece of course as per her contract with Dr. Pepper, in Bikini Beach and Pajama Party. Go, Donna.
1964 proved to be a productive year. 2 more beach party movies were made. The first was Bikini Beach. According to my diary, at noon on April 17th, I attended a cast luncheon given by AIP at the Tail of the Cock on La Cienega Boulevard, commonly known as LA's Restaurant Row. At 2 p.m. that same day, I then went into Gold Star Studios, very familiar to me, to record my song for the movie, Love's a Secret Weapon, written by Jerry Steiner and Guy Hemrick. I can only assume that the choice to record at Gold Star Studios for AIP was due to Brian Wilson recording the track and background vocals for Bustle there. There was such a unique sound. Phil Spector created that wall of sound at Gold Star, and everyone on the West Coast wanted to emulate that rich, full rock beat.
Gamble, gotta take a chance. But when you wanna try a little romance, then love's a secret weapon. Now when you see a boy walking by, take a little chance and give him the eye. All you gotta do is give it a try. Yes, love's a secret weapon. So come on. Keep him there, then love's the secret weapon.
We would pre-record the songs in the film so that the final outcome would be as good as possible. Don't forget, we had elements that couldn't be controlled, such as a plane flying by, or a car driving past, even seagulls. You would do take after take after take if you had to worry about the sound, even on set with so many people milling around. Lip syncing is quite a tedious process if you're not singing with yourself. Fortunately, I always sang with myself and consequently literally performed the tune live as I was acting to make it appear that the performance you see is authentic. I also had to do that in Dr. Pepper commercials with the jingle because that was all pre-recorded as well, and TV shows like American Bandstand and actually the very last show of Shindig. For my scene in the movie, I needed a bathing suit. While the bikini gave birth to the atomic age, my contractual agreement with Dr. Pepper did not allow me to expose my navel. Many years later, an interviewer asked W. Foots Clements, the new CEO of Dr. Pepper, who was really a John Wayne Southern gentleman character, the WW stands for Woodrow Wilson, how much of a risk was it making a young female in America so significant that she would be identified with the image of the company and vice versa? Foots replied, quote, "I think there's always a risk when you tie yourself to anybody, and particularly someone who is in the public, that they may do some things that would not create the kind of image you want, and those are the things that you try to find out before you make the determination. But it's like any other thing in life. There's always a risk, and you have to weigh the risk against the possible and potential benefits, and that's what was done. Fortunately, in Donna's case, I think the right decision was made by the company and the agencies. More than a decade before the beginning of the beach party movies, Brigitte Bardot is becoming a household name in The Girl in the Bikini. Annette and I, and even Sally Field a little later in Gidget, couldn't show our navels. My mother and I went to the shopping center that was closest to us in Culver City, called Culver Center, across the street from MGM Studios, now Sony. You could enter from two main boulevards, and there was a street down the middle between the strips of shops. That was pre-mall. My favorite store was always Leeds Shoe Store. I'm a shoe addict. I was when I was young, and I still am today. We went to J.C. Penney, the main department store there, to look for a bathing suit, but to no avail. Walking past several other stores, we came to a little hole in the wall that was selling wholesale bathing suits. My mother was very price conscious, and since this was coming out of our pocket, at least initially, she only wanted to pay a very rock-bottom price. The wholesale house really provided that environment, which inadvertently created a bit of a harmony between my mother and me. While she was focused on the price, I was focused on the style, and we came together as a harmonious solution. This meant a lot to me. Anything to reduce stress between my mother and I was a blessing. I found the little pleated two-piece yellow and white bathing suit. I seemed to always gravitate toward yellow when I was a performer. A few of the dresses that I have survived and still in my closet are yellow. Not just yellow, they're canary yellow. So was this bathing suit. The pleated skirt gave it a very ingenue effect that I think has survived to this day. Just by accident, I fell into a timeless bathing suit costume for this film. I wish I still had the suit, but I think my mom sold it in a garage sale. For my song, we were shooting out on the beach, and I was shivering. Of course, scenes designed to be shown in summer are inevitably shot in winter, and so actresses and models must hide their goosebumps while wearing bikinis. It scared me when I walked out to join the group of beach boys and girls because there was kind of a no man's land between where the crew and where the actual scene was. Normally, I was always more or less in a huddle with the crew and my chaperone, my dad. Suddenly, I entered this little bit of freedom, and it scared me. But then, when I joined the group, I felt less threatened by them than I did by my usual authority figures. In fact, I felt welcomed. When the music started and I started to sing along with it and dance in the sand, I began to feel no threat at all. My instincts of being abandoned were always tempered by my singing. This was one of those rare occasions where I really felt a part of something, some social connection that could be fun and where I could relax a little bit without someone always breathing down my neck. It's hard dancing in the sand, really hard. I knew I had to do a few takes, and that takes a lot of energy, which got captured in the film, and that's a plus. While my big scene was filmed at Coral Beach in Malibu, I spent a lot of time at Columbia Ranch where other scenes were filmed. Even when I wasn't filming, I was required by Dr. Pepper to be on set, and so there was a lot of waiting around in case there was any other opportunity for product placement. In Bikini Beach, Frankie and Annette were again the stars, as well as the ensemble cast members, including the characters Big Drag, played by Don Rickles, and Harvey Lumbeck as Eric Von Zipper. The film was written by Bill Asher, Leo Townsend, and Mr. Dillon. A little tidbit surfaced while my collaborator, Dr. Adam Gerace, and I were thinking about Bikini Beach, and why in the world Frankie Avalon would play a dual role that emulated a Brit. In Bill Asher's own words, James Nicholson had wanted the Beatles to be in the next film, and so Bill had written a script. After appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show, however, the agents told Bill, "Oh, no, we can't give them away for what you want to pay for them." He then had to rewrite the script to make it about one guy, not four. Added to the cast was Martha Heyer, who appeared with Audrey Hepburn in her role as Sabrina. Martha's most significant role came as the love interest of Frank Sinatra in Some Came Running. She received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, which was impressive. Meredith Mcrae, daughter of Gordon and Sheila Mcrae of Broadway musical fame, came on board. She was someone I could relate to. And I could also relate to Bobby Shaw, a beautiful blonde who played a bit part in the films with the masterful Buster Keaton. She had a very kind personality, they both did, that gave them a softness that felt in harmony with my own. Little Stevie Wonder was back again, so that his participation musically lifted the film to a higher vibe than just pure slapstick and teen love. He cast his magic spell singing, "Happy Feelin', Dance and Shout." Another surprise was Keenan Nguyen, an actor of great prestige. He created a higher plane of professionalism. His son Ned was cast as an extra, a beach boy. Another son of Hollywood royalty was Jody Mcrae, son of Joel Mcrae and Frances D. A little man named Janos Prohaska showed up in a chimpanzee suit. Monkey Man had a significant role in the movie. Off camera, he was full of mischief, as the suit became his alter ego. He took his chimpanzee side quite seriously by mildly harassing all the surfer girls. He'd show up behind a girl and start jumping up and down, making chimp noises, and generally wouldn't stop until someone was thoroughly annoyed. Again, I was spared, thank goodness. He approached me one day, but saw my dad nearby and decided to put his full attention on a more vulnerable victim. It was all in good fun, of course. Janos was among the best animal actors in the business. Don Rickles, Harvey Lembeck, Buddy Hackett were the comedy club element of the films. I never got close enough to actually hear their conversation, but I sensed that I could be a target for their humor in a harsh way. With my dad always a few feet away from me, I never had an encounter. I did observe them, though. Each of their faces were so unique, especially Buddy Hackett's. I interpreted the gravelly laughter that could be heard from their intimate circle as burlesque humor, but I was strictly a voyeur. There were generally a lot of extras milling around, beach boys, beach girls, and muscle men. These three genius comics gravitated to each other. It was an atmosphere of exclusivity. Of course, the director, Bill Asher, and his team had their tier. A parade of beach bunnies would file in and out of Bill Asher's trailer, coming in with their cheeks normal and coming out with their cheeks flushed from their frolics. Jim Nicholson, the producer, hung around the set a lot. One of the cast members was his girlfriend, Susan Hart. In my mind, there was an agenda here. Among the various strata and social groups amongst the cast and crew, I remained separate due to my relationship with Dr. Pepper or my dad always being close by. In the next film of that year, Pajama Party, Annette returned to star this time with Tommy Kirk from Old Yeller fame. Actress Elsa Lanchester played a comedic role alongside character actor Jesse White as Jay's Sinister Hulk. I had issues of feeling good about what I was doing, so keeping company with veterans of show business helped to boost my self-esteem a little. A surprise visit from Toni Basil as a pajama girl was my introduction to a great dancer and choreographer. I would later work with her on Shindig. My scene came up when we were on location at Paradise Cove. Traveling north on PCH past Malibu, you turn left on a narrow road past a trailer park. An opening reveals a small stretch of white sands beach and a small pier. The camera crew set up for the entire day. My call was very early. I woke up at 4:30 that morning, a bit earlier than my usual time of around 5, because I had a 6:30 makeup call, and the weather predicted a perfect day for outdoor shooting, so we had to get started filming at 8 a.m. The song I sang in Pajama Party was Among the Young. The music was pre-recorded by Al Sims, the music director, and my song was again written by Jerry Steiner and Guy Hemrick, a very sweet guy who also played an extra in the film. These movies were on a tight budget of a few $100,000, so I, for one, only received union wages. This was a bonus after my base guarantee pay from Dr. Pepper, but I never saw a penny of it. Generally, shooting outside is best in the mornings and afternoons. When the sun is too high, it causes a glare in the lighting for the camera. The cinematographer was David Crosby's father, Floyd. I recall David visiting the set and hearing his name. He was a young teenager at the time, curious about what movies his father was working on. My song was arranged as an homage in my own way to pay tribute to my idol, Elvis Presley. I sang my arrangement to Al Sims, who said, "Yeah, let's do it that way." We sped it up at the end, much the way of Elvis's rendition of his Vegas performances, and slowed it back down for a dramatic ending.
Girls in bikinis steal the show. Yeah, walking down the beach to and fro. It's summertime, we have a ball. We live it up, yeah, till the fall. 'Cause that's the way it's done among the young. Among the young. That's the way it's done among the very young. That's the way it's done among the very young. That's the way it's done among the young. 'Cause that's the way it's done among the young.
We took take after take all day except for a lunch break. By the end of the day, no amount of suntan oil could prevent how burnt my skin was. It's part of the job, part of the experience, and now part of the memory. I chose a one-piece red bathing suit again, keeping in mind the clause in my Dr. Pepper contract. Just showing my legs and back were actually quite enough for me to deal with, so I never felt like I wanted to rebel and go against the rules. Annette chose a one-piece as well, but it had a bottom piece and a mesh middle that connected to her top. She had to uphold her proper image from Disney, so this was a bit risky. Clearly, her skin showed through the fishnet before her waistline, just a peek at her belly button. Of course, she was 21 years old at the time, which was miles away from my age of 17, still legally a minor. While Maury always lurking around and sending me constant messages of how I needed protection, I felt safe in my choice of a solid one-piece suit. No one ever came on to me on the set. It was understandable that with my dad nearby, I was not fair game, and everyone knew I was a Dr. Pepper girl, usually supervised by a rep from the company. While I'm on the subject, I was looking through a book called Dr. Pepper, King of Beverages, written by Harry Ellis, one of the executives at Dr. Pepper in the 60s. This is an account of the Dr. Pepper history for almost 100 years. Turning to page 218 of my copy, I found a letter in an envelope between the pages, written by the author, dated July 7th, 1982. Dear Donna, what a pleasure it was to talk to you yesterday on the phone. You reminded me of so many exciting and wonderful events. I could write a book about all the things we've done and the places we've been. What I remember most was that you were such an attractive gal, and I felt the great responsibility of protecting you from all the wags that made passes at you. What burned me up the most were all the old geezers that took shots at you. Sincerely, Harry Ellis. Mr. Ellis had contacted me in 1982 to be part of a special event for Dr. Pepper, and this was in response. He also signed the book to me To Donna Loren, with deep gratitude for your loving friendship, Harry Ellis. In Pajama Party, I was elevated to the status of a few speaking lines as well as a song. My scene giving advice to Annette by the pool was a real thrill, although, as part of the scene, she was looking away from me the whole time. She didn't want to hear my advice. Soon after that, a crazy pool scene followed. Thank goodness I was allowed to leave in time to miss being thrown into the pool. I wasn't a swimmer. That's my little secret. Didn't learn how to swim really till I was about 30, and I've never been totally comfortable because I never learned how to swim properly. But anyway, I love the ocean. I adapted to it when I moved to Hawaii. I was, however, told to wear a scantily clad, for me, baby doll nightie in another scene I shared with Annette, a far cry from my usual flannel pajamas in my private life. Dr. Pepper notified us, that is my mother and dad, of a trip to New York to shoot a calendar of me in 4 seasons of costumes. Packing me up to go away again only one day after my 17th birthday, I could tell my mother was jealous of the attention I was getting, not only from my blossoming career, but also from the vigilant supervision of Maury. We were booked to stay at the Summit Hotel at Lexington Avenue and 51st Street in Midtown Manhattan. My wake-up calls came early. Dr. Pepper was furnishing me with wardrobe, hair, and makeup. I was not familiar with the East Coast city, and neither was Maury. Being whisked away in a limo early in the morning to a hair salon gave me a bird's-eye view of skyscrapers I had only seen in movies like King Kong. My hair was trimmed to a very traditional length, most common for a French model, right at the neck and jawline after it was curled under barely long enough for a flip. I had 4 scenes to photograph for the calendar. Each day, I would start out by getting my hair washed and styled according to the scene. One was where I would be lying on a shag rug listening to a 45 RPM record. Another was talking on a princess phone. A very cute white poodle was added to the 3rd scene where I'm listening to my radio, and the big finale was getting ready for the prom. At this stage of my career, I had been experimenting with hair and makeup for my distinct look. I directed the hairstylist as best I could, but of course they were professionals, so I really let them do their work. I was okay with the results, but as you see the progression in further Dr. Pepper calendars, they were more consistent with my performances I did on TV and personal appearances. I learned how to do my own hair and makeup, which gave me a bit of empowerment. I recalled a photographer using a portrait camera in which I had to freeze for several seconds to help the camera with its exposure. Large, heavy plates and metal frames were used in this process to capture my images. It was thrilling for me to be in New York. It was extra thrilling for me to be treated as a celebrity. I did my work, and I was rewarded. John Simmons, an executive from Dr. Pepper headquarters in Dallas, came to witness the photographing of the new 1964-65 calendar. I was informed that a special night out was arranged for me and, of course, my dad. A new hit play on Broadway called Funny Girl, starring a newcomer called Barbra Streisand, would be my night out on the town. I wore the white gown given to me for the prom scene in the calendar. I also received a fur wrap from my parents upon my request before I left for New York. It was white fox. Long white gloves completed my ensemble with my up hairdo. Essentially, when we wrapped shooting the prom scene, I left there as is to go to the theater. Mr. Simmons and Maury escorted me to our front row center seats. There I sat mesmerized for over 2 hours, listening and watching Barbra Streisand performing in her role as Fanny Brice. As I watched her sing, hands outstretched as though every note coming from the core of her being was also coming out through the tips of her very long fingers and fingernails, I felt admiration, camaraderie, and contradiction. She was not a beauty by American standards, as I was judged, yet her beauty emanated from her soul and permeated her every move and note she sang. I became an instant fan. She touched my heart like no other singer had. It was the highlight of my young life to have been privileged to be in her presence during the dawning of her superlative career. On May 13th, I left for Cincinnati for a preview and public appearance for Muscle Beach Party, and 3 days later we went straight from there to New York for a teenage fashion show for Chuck Laufer and Teen Magazine. They called for a rehearsal at Carnegie Hall before the big night at the Barbizon Plaza. There was so much material to go through because the show was like a little Broadway show with fashion. I had to learn songs that were original tunes for the show, and I had several costume changes. It was an experience of a lifetime. I was the star of this show, and I literally experienced having to learn songs on the spot, perform them, do costume changes spontaneously, effortlessly, and complete this long, long engagement. My first year working for Dr. Pepper opened my eyes to the corporate world. Men in suits all having titles and sitting around big tables at board meetings. It also opened my eyes to the racial climate at the time and segregation, particularly in the South, where I spent much of my time for Dr. Pepper. I did know how it felt to be different. In grammar school, the predominant race and religion fit the WASP identity. I remember hearing some kids say, behind my back, referring to me being Jewish, "Where are your green horns?" However, coming from a middle-class Southern California environment, which was more liberal than Middle America, it didn't prepare me for all the division I encountered. The initial exposure to segregation for me was when I was asked to sing in a board meeting in the Dallas headquarters. It was called for 7 a.m. I arrived in full dress for this occasion, suit, hat, gloves, hair, and makeup. A minister was leading the morning prayers as I entered. About a dozen men were seated around a long board meeting table. At the helm, CEO Wesby Parker. By his side was W. Foots Clemens. A very familiar face was also there, John Simmons, Director of Advertising, and Harry Ellis. It felt odd being 16 years old and in a room full of men who could be my father or grandfather. I was their new darling and was already proving to be good for their business. The new campaign featuring me was already showing profits. In a weird way, they were inducting me into their world, being invited into the men's club. Not just the men's club, the Southern Gentlemen's Club. They had one expectation: sing for us. Sing I did, a cappella. The song I chose, This Could Be the Start of Something Big, written by Steve Allen, and that was met by a roaring applause. After the meeting was over, I asked to use the ladies' room. I was led downstairs to a shocking realization. Signs on the door read, "For colored ladies only," "For white ladies only," same for men. Outside were drinking fountains labeled, "For coloreds only," "For whites only." As appalling as this was, I refrained from showing the shocked feeling inside me. I couldn't even share this with my dad because even though we were of Jewish descent, he and my mother were always uncomfortable when any situation or anything was unfamiliar, even when it came to issues of race. I never shared their belief, but I grew up tolerating it. How ironic was it to have the opportunity of a lifetime await me in this corporate world that provided my family with financial security, and under the same roof be faced with disturbing issues of civil rights. My awareness is that we are all one. As the spokesperson for Dr. Pepper, I had the opportunity to cross those racially charged barriers on behalf of the company to promote their product and connect with everyone, people of all races, all ages, all genders. We connected with our hearts.
Donna, you talk about being on the beach movie sets, particularly during Love's a Secret Weapon, your performance of Love's a Secret Weapon, which of course is the name of our podcast and our theme music as well. And in particular, when discussing filming out on the beach for that song, that you experienced a bit of fear because you were kind of left alone for a while. Like usually you were kind of in this huddle with either the crew or Maury, your adopted dad. But then, for a minute or so, you were kind of on your own, and there was that fear before you joined the group, and you were much more at ease. Was this one of those few occasions when you could have, I guess, some interaction with your castmates, where you weren't kind of being chaperoned so closely by your dad?
Interaction wasn't exactly the way that it was.
Yeah.
but really, I'll just I kind of remember exactly the feeling and the situation.
Yeah.
Because it was along the coast of Malibu where there was no formal parking area. We had to park along the highway and climb down. And so all that equipment, cameras and, the lighting and all that had to be carted down. And so that was all kind of stationed closest to the highway down below on the sand. So was, kind of where the makeup, hair, food, all that kind of stuff was laid out and for the cast and crew. But the ocean was probably more than 100 feet west. So
Yeah.
so basically what they did was they built kind of a ramp for the camera to be rolled out onto. And
Right.
Maury and the Dr. Pepper rep were left along with, where everyone was stationed. And then the action was closest to the ocean. So I had never really experienced that distance. It sounds weird, but on set or even on other beach scenes, the beach was more accessible to the parking area so that the crew and the cast wasn't so separated when the filming happened. And so Maury was, who knows, he was probably 20 feet away from me at all times. But it just felt like kind of going through the rabbit hole when when I started walking out toward where the camera just, kept moving. And then there was a volleyball net and all of that was closest to the ocean. And so everyone was separated, suddenly it's like I had to be in front of the camera and the cast had to be in front of the camera. And yeah, it was freaking me out because I felt like, my dad was getting smaller and smaller in the distance. And, and it was initially scary, but once I, everyone was always about 5 or 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
And they had the freedom to do, whatever, while they were working. And they didn't have a serious role to play except for me and Frankie and Annette and, the essential people. So
Yeah.
even, Tony Basil and Mike Nader, Tony Basil definitely was part of the choreography, but once she was in the group, she was kind of one of the gang, and
She was
wasn't
one of the Beach
treated
Girls,
yeah, she wasn't treated that special at that point either.
Yeah.
But because of my role with Dr. Pepper and, and then my dad, and being a minor, just separated me out. And so I just never really, even without socializing in a regular, normal way, I didn't feel like, anyone was going to bully me or look at me or, scrutinize me or make me feel uncomfortable, I just fit right in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that was the feeling, and that was the circumstance. And then, of course, they start the music, and the
Mm.
music is played very loud. The
Mm.
ocean is roaring, you know, the wind is blowing, um, and uh, and so I'm singing live
Yeah.
to to the recording and dancing in the sand.
And dancing in
And
the sand, I was going to say, which I can't imagine is a particularly easy thing to do while looking so graceful and unflappable.
well, you know how it is if you ever try to run on the sand.
Oh, it's near impossible. When I take Lucy for a walk, she can kind of do it, and I'm kind of straggling behind. It's kind of like, go on without me. I'm just dead weight, But
Well, try to do the pony in the
yeah,
sand.
or the Watusi, or the absolutely.
So that's my visual, and that's my
Mm,
experience. And the whole all the beach bunnies and the beach boys, and all the cast members were just very compatible. That's all I can
mm.
say, and very embracing. So it just made me feel like, okay, I'm cool, and I don't need my dad, just a shoulder away, to
Yeah,
protect me.
yeah.
And so,
And that's I guess the thing, isn't it, that, like you say in the reading, there were kind of naturally those, while you're suggesting that everyone was very welcoming, there were those kind of tiers within the cast. So there was perhaps the beach girls and boys, many of them who were actual surfers, and that's where they were cast from, and where they came from. And then, of course, there were kind of the stars, the people like Frankie and Annette and John Ashley and Debbie Wally and Jodie Mcrae and people like that. And then, of course, there were the veterans, which you talk about, which must have been a pretty interesting perspective to sort of watch these kind of these legends on set. People like Don Rickles and Buddy Hackett. I mean, just the thought of that is just, Vincent Price chasing Bobby Shaw, around set, I should say, for
Buster
the film.
Keaton.
Buster Keaton. Oh God, I've done that again, haven't I? Buster Keaton.
Buster Keaton, who's
Yeah.
probably more iconic in his own way than Vincent Price, but I definitely Vincent Price was more of the horror films,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. But and as you said, you kind of saw them sort of holding court, on set. But they didn't, so-called mess with you or try to take the mickey out of you. And I guess that's perhaps because you were always so closely chaperoned.
When you think about the social abilities or social, how do you say that? How do you say that? The socialization
Yeah,
of the various tiers of either extras or a bit part players or co-stars or the stars. Everyone has their own habits. When Stevie Wonder was on set, he was a young man, but I don't remember him having a chaperone. I don't recall seeing an adult with him, but
Yeah.
I do recall him having his own small dressing room with like a little typewriter that was Braille. And that he was probably doing his studies in between takes.
He probably was, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
he was young. He was maybe 12 or 13 at the time, maybe even, I would say in the very beginning of his career. And then there would be the kind of the character actors like Fred Clark, that tier of character actors, and they would be in their trailers, in their dressing rooms, just maybe reading and resting, because that's, there's a lot of loose time on a set.
For sure.
That's very famous for actors showing up, and they know that it's going to be a 14+ hour day. And they
a lot of waiting around.
Yeah, so they bring their reading material or whatever they do, and to have their own privacy. And And then, it's really good when you're busy on set, because then you always feel like you have a purpose.
Mm.
And but it was always interesting, to see how different people socialized, like
Mm.
Bobby Shaw, and Meredith Mcrae, I found to be very friendly, very compassionate, and kind of big sisterly with me. And
Mm. Mm.
Bobby Shaw is still to this day, very, very kind and considerate and concerned about me, and always, communicating, and very lovely whenever I see her.
Fantastic. Yeah, and certainly we should say, she's quite a revered acting coach now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And when you get to even Annette and Frankie, even though they were the stars,
Mm.
they still had their times when there were sets that needed to be polished up, and the timing, and everyone has their own kind of courtesy, when
Mm.
someone is waiting to do their part, and others are actively doing their. And of course, if you've got somebody like Don Rickles, on set, if everyone wants to hear him, no matter what, he had
Yeah.
so much charisma.
Absolutely, and I spoke to an actor, Jonathan Daly, who worked with him later on in a TV series, and he was kind of saying with Don Rickles, you had to be kind of on or quick as a whip, because he was just every minute of every day he was just so quick, and you had to just be able to keep up with him.
Well, that's
Because
so
of
typical. That's so
mm,
typical of comedians. The comedians are such a rare breed. The ones that I've been in close contact
mm,
with, that's just who they are.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you can imagine,
absolutely,
living with, I mean, I'm sure that Don Rickles was a dear man. I know that he was very sincere and very,
mm,
kind, and kind of almost remorseful for saying things
yeah,
if
yeah,
he thought he hurt somebody's feelings, and of course he he did that for a living.
yeah, absolutely.
But the primary comedians were Buddy Hackett, Harvey Lembeck,
Mm,
and
mm,
Don Rickles. Those were the primaries that were usually on set, or somewhere involved in the beach party movies that I was involved.
yeah, yeah,
And they did stick together. They had their own language and their own kind of uh history as
mm,
comedians, where they came up from, what they had to endure, how they became who they are. And that was just fascinating. And actually, I would say Buster Keaton, who was
mm,
from a totally different era,
mm.
was more of a loner than, he didn't. I never saw him socialize with anyone. You
That's interesting,
know,
isn't it? Yeah,
of course, that might have come from maybe his silent movie days.
yeah. Could, couldn't break the fourth wall, so that was just kind of the end of it. But I mean, it's it's amazing to think, and yeah, of course, and even Harvey Lembeck, who was more of a contemporary at that time, but just that iconic character of Eric von Zipper. I mean, I just laughed just picturing him.
Yeah.
Um, and certainly, and then there were other people, of course, like Candy Johnson's in your songs, sort of dancing away. There's no other way to explain her other than Energizer Bunny, really. Um, so and of course, if we go back to those, those songs, and I must say with Love's a Secret Weapon, that's often in the beach party films many people think, oh, it only hurts when I cry from Beach Blanket Bingo, which we will talk about in a subsequent episode, because you do have a chapter pertaining to that. But I think a lot of people always do talk about Love's a Secret Weapon, that performance, as being one of their favorites, and I do wonder if some of that sort of spontaneity of what was going on, or the situation you were put into on set regarding that, kind of resulted in a very sort of
Mm,
unique performance.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, Adam. Yeah. Well, it started in the studio
Yes,
with
yes.
the songwriters, and I think I stylized the song because it wasn't written to have the chorus sung the way that I did, and
Mm,
so
mm.
that was it's always fun, and you can kind of make something your own.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, for
so I think
sure.
it started there. And then I think, the cast and the cameraman and the director were enjoying the experience. We were all enjoying it. So it was a collective, I
Mm.
think.
Were the songwriters Jerry Steiner and Guy Henrik
Yes.
about? I mean, I know Guy Henrik, of course, had some sort of scenes as one of the Beach Boys, sort of in the background and so on. But were they on set quite regularly?
Guy was, yes.
And I presume you, of course, worked with Al Sims, the
Oh, yeah.
music director as well. But would that have been more in the actual sort of studio, or?
Yes, definitely. But he was always
Yeah.
on set.
And then of course, you're talking about this idea of kind of adding something to your own performance, making it unique and making it your own, from what was already in the song. But that also comes across in Among the Young when you kind of, do something particularly at the end. So tell me about that, where you sort of got the inspiration for your sort of finale of the song.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Elvis, and I used to love the
Mm,
way that he would change his tempos and make it more dramatic, at
mm,
the end of his
mm,
songs. So that was kind of my homage to Elvis, just breaking it down and speeding it up toward the end. So that was basically it. It was
mm.
a mood changer. Yeah, and of course that was shot at Paradise Cove, which is
Mm,
an extraordinarily special beach. Actually, you know what?
mm.
The little house in Beaches,
Yes.
is
Yeah, when
off to
they're.
one
Mm,
side. There's like a little pier there, and then off to one side on a little bluff is that house that Beaches was filmed in. And it's Paradise Cove is a very small beach, but it has a lovely entrance which makes it quite private, and a parking lot that's level with the sand, so it makes it very
mm.
accessible. And the ocean there is very calm, so they set up that stage there and made it quite easy, to access it and everything. And um, I guess the only thing is that when we were shooting it, it was full sun all day, and for some
Mm,
reason they just kept shooting. I mean, a lot of times when you're doing external shots, the peak of the day is not that friendly to the camera. So
yeah,
they love shooting in
yeah.
the morning and they love shooting in the afternoon.
Mm,
But they
mm,
just kept shooting. And I just remember
mm.
my skin, I was
Of
completely
course,
fried by the end of the day.
I can imagine because and of course, filming something like that, would take a fair amount of time. I imagine that you were on set for quite a while to do one of those musical
That I
numbers.
remember was pretty much all day.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you talk about Paradise Cove and first of all, we should tell the listeners that a few years ago, you published a sort of pictorial autobiography or memoir, and there are some wonderful pictures, in color from those beach movies at those particular
Hmm.
beaches, that are really great candid ones that your adopted dad Maury
Hmm.
photographed. But also, I remember when I was in Los Angeles visiting you back in 2011, we visited some of those beaches because at the time we weren't going to. What had happened is I was supposed to, I think, leave that day, and then there was some sort of delay with
That's
flights
right.
across, kind of across the board, and so we thought, well, what are we going to do with this extra day? And so we got on the Pacific Coast Highway. Um, and stopped past places like Paradise Cove and Leo Carrillo Beach, from Beach Blanket Bingo,
S-
with those iconic
Yes.
rocks. Um,
Sycamore Cove.
and yes, that's right. And I think even Zuma
Yes.
Beach we stopped
Hmm.
past as well. So yeah, the chance to see some of those in person was pretty spectacular because they are. I mean, I come from Australia where we have spectacular beaches, but those are
Yeah,
spectacular beaches.
Malibu, certainly. I mean, everywhere in the world, wherever you go, there's a particular energy. But yeah, Malibu is one of those special places.
And certainly at certain times in your life, even after this, of course, you sort of lived close enough to those areas that they were a part of your life, for quite a few years, those beaches.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised 2 miles away from the ocean in Mar Vista. And then that was until I was 21. And then I've always lived near the beach. And then probably in the mid 80s, I actually lived on the ocean in Malibu at Broad Beach, which is near the Ventura County line. And that was pretty incredible. And but I've always, and then in Hawaii, I lived next to the ocean, and it's a special experience. Although sometimes when those waves start crashing at night, it can give a girl nightmares, I have to say.
Absolutely, I can imagine. And if we sort of go back to certainly shooting on the beach, and then some of the scenes, of course, were at the Columbia Ranch for the films as well. Particularly, your pool scene with Annette, and that's a very iconic pool that I think you can probably spy that in all sorts of Columbia TV series of the '60s, things like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, always sort of filmed around that pool. But of course, the director of the films was William Asher, who was, of course, a legendary TV producer. I Love Lucy and Bewitched and things like that. But you kind of have a particular image of Bill Asher on set, which is kind of interesting.
Yes. Well, bless his soul. Rest in peace. I guess it's pretty typical of Hollywood, and it has its reputation. But since I was always kind of separated from that whole scene, I got to observe him having a dressing room trailer on set, and the Beach Bunnies would, from what I observed, kind of parade, not all of them, but some of them would parade into his trailer, and they'd come out with their ponytails a little disheveled and their cheeks all flushed, and so
that's very
that's
diplomatic.
Hollywood.
I like that.
That's Hollywood. Yep.
And I'm sure he would have been the first to admit that he was perhaps a bit of a we'll call it a ladies' man, back then. Interestingly, because we have a couple of quotes from Bill Asher in the reading, the first regarding the whole idea of that the Beatles were originally going to potentially be in one of the films. And the film being a Bikini Beach, of course, and then that was right around the time when they became very popular, kind of exploded in the US thanks to the Ed Sullivan Show, and all of a sudden they weren't going to be within the price range, which explains why then Frankie kind of plays this dual character of obviously Frankie, but also the potato bug, the British
a different insect.
Yeah, a different insect, absolutely. But the other thing I sort of found interesting just in sort of researching some of this is that Bill Asher was actually relatively close to John Kennedy, who of course in one of our previous episodes we spoke about your experience of being in Dallas at the time, but he was actually good friends with him and actually produced the birthday celebration where Marilyn Monroe sings that iconic happy birthday to JFK. And so he kind of Bill Asher sort of told the story sort of years later where they were preparing to do the first...
Hello, Lucy.
She's heard a car driving up. That's all right, Luce. Great. And Bill Asher, sort of tells this story many years later where they were preparing to do the first table read for Bewitched when he heard the news that President Kennedy had been assassinated. So, certainly just a bit of a relation to what we've spoken about, previously. And I guess to sort of put in context what was going on at the time, of course, we're talking a lot about the beach party films here now. But at the same time, of course, this was early in your contract with Dr. Pepper. In, of course, late 63, 64 was when you were sort of starting to film the beach movies. But this sort of coincided really with you, your first year or so with Dr. Pepper, and how that your campaign was already starting to show, particular promise, and they were quite pleased with that. And you tell this story about going to one of the board meetings in Dallas, and that must have been quite an experience to sort of sit at this table with these
Amazing.
executives.
Walking into a board meeting early in the morning, and it seemed like they would start their meetings with a prayer, and then here comes a teenager, but dressed like hat, gloves, suit, the whole the whole little business lady costume, into their board meeting at 7 a.m. or some hour like that, and they wanted me to entertain them. And I would say the average age was collectively probably 12 men seated around a boardroom table, usually Southern gentlemen. And here comes little old me, and I would say collectively they had to be over 1,000 years old, and but they were very respectful, and kind of made me feel even a little equal to them, whereas I could talk to them. I don't recall Maury being in that, but he must have been in that room.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? That would be interesting if he wasn't.
I don't recall, because there are no photographs of me in that room. So who knows? I may have just again had that separation, of okay, it's now you're on, and so but there was a strange feeling where I was introduced to everyone, and and knew them all by name, and I could even, I felt like telling them, calling them by Mr. and addressing them in a more formal way, but there were a few of them that actually became very friendly, and I would speak to them by their first name.
Who were they?
Exactly.
People like, I guess, Harry Ellis
and Joe Hughes. Yeah. And Foots, before he became CEO. I used to call him Foots. It was Mr. Parker.
Mr. Parker, yes. And we've spoken about Mr. Parker before, of course, when you were in Dallas, and he was the executive who rings you on the telephone as you're preparing to be introduced downstairs in the ballroom when President Kennedy is shot. So he was
Mr.
definitely
Parker.
a Mr.
And
Parker.
John Simmons was always John.
Yep, and he was around quite a bit in those sort of days. But what's interesting is I know we have a sort of a letter that you found from Harry Ellis that was sort of wedged, between a Dr. Pepper retrospective book that you were given in the 80s, Dr. Pepper King of the Beverages, which was written by Harry Ellis, and I actually sort of picked that up, many years ago when we were researching, but I picked it up recently again, and sort of I think what comes across when you read the chapters that particularly involve sort of your time with Dr. Pepper is how central you were to their campaign at the time, not only to sort of increase that sort of youth market, but to really go onto the national, the national stage in terms of what they were looking for. So how central you were to becoming that national face as Dr. Pepper was trying to increase their national presence, and sort of, around that time, from what I understand, what sort of helped them to be able to increase the national presence is typically at the time a bottler couldn't, bottle competing cola drinks. So many of the bottlers would have been Coke or Pepsi, bottlers, and so they weren't allowed to take on competing cola drinks. And what happened around that time was that there was actually a challenge that Coca-Cola took a bottler to court, saying that they shouldn't be allowed to bottle Dr Pepper because it was a competing cola flavour. And the Dallas judge, Sarah T. Hughes, ruled that Dr Pepper was not a cola. So that then, which of course
That's right, not a
because the
cola or a
jingle
root beer.
is. Yeah. So after that, the bottlers could be bottling both, and that kind of gave the national stage. But what really sort of happened is how central you were to that campaign to really put Dr. Pepper on that national stage. So I'm not surprised when you're in this business meeting with these executives, sort of how welcoming they were, because you were representing the face of the
Isn't
company
that crazy?
and profits.
Seriously, I mean,
Yeah.
what a dichotomy, walking into a room with these men I remember everyone wearing brown suits,
Brown
and
suits.
some of them cowboy hats. I mean, you're in Dallas,
Wow. Yeah.
and some of them smoking
Of course.
cigars, and but
Mm.
the idea that they welcomed me in and treated me the way they did, that with much reverence, really.
Mm.
Although,
Yeah.
there was a job to be done, and so I guess they knew that I would do that, and until until I decided to retire.
And Harry Ellis writes in the book, with your retirement, that she had won thousands of friends for Dr. Pepper in her 5-year period with the company. But I want to talk a little bit about something else that I think comes up now in this chapter reading, but also in the future in some of your touring, because of course Dr. Pepper sponsored the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tours, which we're going to talk about in a subsequent episode. But as well as, of course, Dick Clark's American Bandstand and so on. But what sort of comes up during your time in this at the Dallas headquarters, as well as when you are doing the Caravan of Stars, is this racial segregation of the South of that time, and where you're just really shocked at going to the washrooms and seeing the segregated signs. That must have been quite a lot for someone, a teenager, to kind of be exposed to, particularly given, as you said, you'd largely grown up in Southern California, and while you weren't immune to that kind of, coming across the sorts of ways that Jewish people, for example, were described and so on, it was a very different experience for you.
Yeah, it was very, very disturbing, and you know me, I really do see the human race and all life on planet Earth as we are all one. And maybe I wasn't able to express it verbally that way, but that's just how I've always felt and always believed. And to actually, the drinking fountains were delineated as well, and it was all down a hallway. So, the row of doors, the doors that, discriminated colored men, and then the white men, and colored women, and white women, and then colored drinking fountain and white drinking fountain.
Yeah, and even that word "colored," I mean, it's just horrendous, really. Like the way it's being
that was,
used in that context.
that was the mid to late 60s. That's what prevailed in the South. And then when I was walking on the sidewalk in Dallas, I recall a black, African American person walking toward me, and the closer they got, they stepped off the curb, to let me and I guess my dad pass.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was the way of life down there.
And in a lot of ways that you talk about, and not necessarily in this context, but as the Dr. Pepper girl, you came across a lot of different people in all walks of life, and whether socioeconomic as well, and so on. But you kind of had this role, or this role almost, I guess, as kind of an ambassador for the company, of course, but also someone who connected with people as part of that role.
Yes, I mean, I took on that persona, for a variety of reasons. Number one, responsibility. But, left to my own devices, of course, I just loved looking at, in the eyes of anyone that I was confronted with, or just passing on the street. You just actually, even if it's just a momentary exchange, it can be meaningful. And it just always felt that way to me.
Yeah.
So, as a company, it was just an American company at the time. Now it's international, but it was a sense of responsibility, but my nature, kind of fell into place in that way too. It wasn't an effort for me.
Yeah, for sure. That was kind of the way that you approached people, regardless of the position you were in. And so that became, that was part of the job, but that was part of who you were.
Yeah, and I would say that, any public person that has that kind of personality is the same way. I mean, I'm not going to say names, but there are very high profile people that can just walk down the street and not be intimidated by someone recognizing them. There's just a smile and a fair exchange, and it's just part of life. It's almost like a little smile goes a long way. And when they're recognized, when someone's recognized, suddenly they're not a stranger anymore. They're just like part of your citizenship, or part of your big global family. I once passed Dr. Cornel West, Harvard professor, in an airport, and I just kind of gave him the high five, and he connected with me, and that big smile of his, and he high fived me back, and I think it's part of a person's nature. It doesn't matter who they are. If they're a friendly good person, who knows? It would be nice if all the leaders of our different countries had that same kind of personality.
Absolutely, particularly in these times all over the world. I think that would be very effective, shall we say. And just to, because I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Obviously, we've covered the beach films. We've covered your first sort of year of Dr. Pepper, and particularly this idea of the national stage as that goes on, and will become more apparent, in our subsequent episodes where we talk about the Caravan of Stars as well as Shindig. But in the reading, and we have spoken about this before in a previous episode because it came up, but you did have this very exciting experience when you were filming the calendars, the first calendar scenes for the first Dr. Pepper calendar, and you were treated to a night out, accompanied by your father and John Simmons from Dr. Pepper, to see the one and only Barbara Streisand.
John Simmons was one of the VPs of the company, and he met us in New York. And the filming of the calendar was really a very positive experience. Although the portrait photographer used, I think it's, wait a minute, what is it called? A Hasselblad, I think. I knew that because my dad was a photographer. My adopted dad was a photographer, and this Hasselblad, it's like when you see a photographer take the black cloth and duck his head under it, and then he's got a big slide to slide into the camera. And so for every shot, I had to hold my breath 15 seconds. It was I guess in the early days of that type of photography.
I love that.
The secret is to keep breathing, just they say. Hold that pose,
not for 15 seconds.
But yes, in the last scene of that one, I was wearing a prom dress, and I had my opera length gloves and a wrap that I asked my parents for to go out in the evening. white fox wrap. And and
Yeah. Yeah.
so I walked off the set of the last shoot and on to Broadway and was treated to front row center
Mm.
seats at Funny Girl, where I had my first experience watching Barbra Streisand perform and singing
Amazing.
People.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and Omar
Mm.
Sharif, was her co-star.
What a night, I imagine, and particularly, getting to wear, um, your gown, from the prom scene and going onto Broadway. It's a pretty
And it was
pretty
ironic,
indelible
so
experience, I
ironic,
imagine.
because I had heard the song People before on the radio, but I really wasn't that familiar with
Mm.
Barbra
Mm.
Streisand and her look and everything at that moment. And here I
Mm.
had just previously gone through having my cosmetic surgery to change my nose, and was told that I had to look a
Yeah.
certain way.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that proved to be,
Mm.
productive for my career. And here I am sitting front row center having a
Yeah.
bird's eye view
Yeah.
of this woman who was, I don't recall, maybe she's 4 or 5 years older than me, but, you know, with her
Mm.
features, that I was totally criticized and kind of defamed for. And here she is with this gorgeous
Mm.
voice and, just everything that it seemed like she could accept herself for exactly the way she was. And no one could either tell her to
Yeah.
change, or
Yeah.
no one asked her to change. And it was ironic
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
As much as I enjoyed it, I sat there, part of my experience was
Mm.
like, why did I have to go through that? But maybe that's my experience. But look at, and I wasn't like competing or comparing. I was just seeing how
No.
the lack of acceptance in my life, and it seemingly total acceptance in hers.
And that's I think something that I know we talk a lot about in this podcast, and will continue to sort of do so. But that idea of that, I guess, the sense of lack that you felt at that time because of um, both consciously or unconsciously the kinds of messages that were being sort of relayed to you, starting with the family and sort of radiating out in terms of what was an acceptable look or what was acceptable actions and so on. And so and then of course that
Yeah,
had effects on you as a
obviously,
result.
whomever you are and whatever your life turns out to be, the optimal experience for life is to accept yourself for exactly the way you are. And,
Mm.
and that
Mm.
the people that are primary in your life support that. And when it's not the case, it's quite compromising, and it's quite damaging.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, as always. But particularly, there was an interview that was particularly I really found fascinating to listen to that you conducted, which was, of course, with Lana Dale, Dick Dale's widow, and I know that you really appreciate that she took that time
Yes,
to speak
and
so openly and
I
candidly to
really
you.
do want to express my heartfelt appreciation for Lana telling, sharing her heart with me as well as all the listeners, and with you, Adam. And it just shows how dedicated and
Mm.
how devoted she is, and what we may, look forward to in the future once she, gets over this initial grief period, and is able to put down her beautiful story about her love, a love of her husband,
Mm.
and who he was, the legend of the surf rock guitar. That would be something that we really could look forward to.
It'd be tremendous to hear that from her. given all they went through, and as you said, how devoted she was to him. And certainly, maybe a place to end for us is to tell our listeners a little bit about what they can expect. That you've been busy out speaking to people. We have one interview coming up pretty soon. I'm not sure if you want to reveal who that is, or should we leave that?
Well, I can
For
say
later.
that we are going to celebrate someone very special's birthday, and the key word is bikini.
There you go. Given we've been speaking about bikinis, I think this is a very a good little clue for us. So thank you as always for sharing your memories. I know I think particularly a lot of people will get some sort of a lot out of this episode, because we do talk, of course, about some movies that people just absolutely love, and to give them those sort of behind the scenes stories, which I know so many people seek out. So thank you for that. But as well as always, talking about what was sort of going on behind the scenes and some of those experiences.
It's always a
that you
pleasure,
had.
Dr. Adam.
Until next time.
Yes,